Big Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
What is going on? Welcome into another episode of Big Apple Blitz, your one-stop shop for all things New York football. You get the Jets perspective, you get the Giants perspective. It's a big week for us. NFL Scouting Combine week. What is going on? Matt O'Leary, joined by Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how's it going, my friend?
It's going great, man. I'm excited for this NFL Scouting Combine. We've already heard a lot of interesting rumors, some news, some good kind of comments from a lot of the prospects and GMs. It's a really exciting time right now.
Absolutely. And something else, just wanted to give us a little shout out. We nailed it last episode. We were going through cut candidates. Laken Tomlinson out. That's score one for Big Apple Blitz, things you absolutely love to see. But something else that I think you nailed, Anthony, when you were talking was like, hey, like Scouting Combine, is it fun to watch some of these guys go through the drills? Yes. But what's more interesting is the interviews and just kind of the storylines that come out of having, you know, everyone in one spot. And that feels like we've already gotten that so far early in the, you know, still early in this process. There's still a few more days left at the Scouting Combine. So yeah, love all the storylines coming out that we're getting this week.
Yeah, the drills haven't even started yet. They start later today. And already this has been an interesting NFL Scouting Combine because we're hearing conversations about potential trades and, you know, certain teams finalizing their decisions. Patriots are now leaning towards taking a quarterback at number 3, whereas a week ago they were leaning towards trading down. So a whole lot of stuff coming out. And I just think it's a product of having all of those 32 NFL GMs, all those different scouts in one building, all doing the same work. Conversations are going to happen and things are going to heat up.
Absolutely. So let's get into those trade discussions first. Couple ones from the Jets and the Giants perspective. We'll start with the Jets. Big story, as not crazy surprising, but Joe Douglas speaks with the media yesterday, and he confirms that Zach Wilson's agent was given permission to seek a trade, and it all but confirms that Zach Wilson's run in New York is coming to a close. Anthony, I don't know about you, but really not all that surprising. Felt like that had to be the end result after everything that's gone on the last 3 years.
Yeah, it's not surprising in the slightest, just because the comments from the team, from ownership, from the general manager saying things like, we didn't have a backup quarterback. We need to make sure we have a backup quarterback this upcoming season. First of all, I don't think that you should say that kind of thing about the guy who grinded his ass off and stepped into a really tricky situation in Zach Wilson. I mean, he was expected to kind of sit there for a whole year behind Aaron Rodgers and develop. Instead, he gets thrown back in as the starter in week 2, basically. It was an unfortunate situation for both parties, in my opinion, and no surprise that Zach Wilson's being given permission to seek a trade. The Jets seem just about done with him, and he seems just about done with the Jets.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something, you know, that both sides could benefit from. Like, obviously, high expectations when you're taking second overall. I was excited about the Zach Wilson pick. I really liked him as a prospect. I don't know, revisionist history, so you could lie if you want. How'd you feel about Zach Wilson as a prospect in 2021?
I mean, I liked him that year. I didn't do a whole lot of scouting on the quarterbacks, pretty minimal, because the Giants weren't interested in the quarterbacks. So I didn't dive deeply into Zach Wilson, but what I did watch, what I did see, I saw there was an X factor to his game that with the right development and right coaching could be harnessed and probably turn him into a pretty damn good player. But, you know, there were definitely red flags that showed up and were too prevalent in his NFL playing days ultimately. And I think that, you know, I liked him. I wasn't like in full bloom love with him, but I did think that he would be a better player than what he turned out to be.
Yeah, so I absolutely. I had obviously was very in on that draft, as the 2020 Jets were horrible. Everyone knew that they were moving on from Sam Darnold. I had Zach Wilson as my 2A and Justin Fields as my 2B. Like, I had them like very, very close and would have been fine with either one of those selections. At the end of the day, they take Zach Wilson, doesn't work out. But for me, like, you just can't keep making the same mistake of doubling and tripling down on said mistake, Zach Wilson, being a bust. And for me, I think this year that's kind of something that they did that was frustrating, right? Like everyone said at the end of last year, Zach Wilson needs a reset. He needs to sit, get right mentally, come back and play well. And then they never got a real backup quarterback. So if Aaron Rodgers went down, which he ended up doing immediately, which no one could have predicted that, then Zach Wilson was just thrust back right in that position he was a year ago when he was struggling and so obviously mentally broken. I don't think the Jets handled it well. I don't think Zach Wilson gets a full pass from it. Like, I think there's some things he could have done better as well, but just overall messy situation that, as we said, both sides could definitely use a fresh start.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, at least the Jets have like a plan here at quarterback for Zach Wilson. From his perspective, I'm not sure what the plan is. I don't know what the Jets are realistically going to get for him. I'm assuming a lowly day 3 pick that you hopefully turn into a quality special teamer or backup. But I guess that's more value than what you were getting with Zach Wilson, because I think one of the main things about having him on this roster was it just became a bit divisive for the fans. It was like easy target. It's so much controversy. There's so many reasons to argue and nitpick the Jets and their process throughout the offseason with Zach Wilson. So I think that there's just plenty of benefits just to no longer have him in New York. Just ship him off to a new location and, have a fresh start here.
No, I'm with you 100%. And I think the all likelihood of this is probably going to be a day 3 pick swap kind of a trade. Like, it wouldn't shock me. The Jets have a 6th round pick, be like Zach Wilson in a 6th for a 5th round pick from Arizona, let's say, like Kansas City, San Francisco, someone like that. Maybe taking a flyer on him. I don't know if they would really do that much better than that based on what Zach Wilson's put on tape in his first 3 years. Although they say this, like, NFL GMs are dumb sometimes, and they'd be like, hey, we had this, very high pre-draft grade on Zach Wilson, and maybe they believe that it was the Jets that were, wrong. They had the wrong process, and there's talent here, and we think that we can fix them. So maybe they do better than that. I'm putting myself very low expectations. Like, as I said, if the Jets trade Zach in a 6th and jump up 35 spots in the draft and jump up somewhere in the 5th round, I think you just do it and say, okay, like, let's just cut ties and move on.
Yeah, I think that a similar trade to point to would be the Trey Lance trade from the San Francisco 49ers to the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys sent a 4th round pick to get Trey Lance. I think that's probably higher than what the Jets will get for Zach Wilson, just because of a few factors. Like, Trey Lance has a much smaller sample size. Zach Wilson, you kind of already know what you're getting with him. Trey Lance, there was still some sort of a mystery element for the Cowboys trading for him. It was like, okay, he really hasn't gotten a legitimate chance. Maybe we could develop him into a solid backup. But with Zach Wilson, you kind of already know what you have. There's not too much more development. That's how I think most teams feel. There's not much more development, not much more talent to really pull out from. So I think that, that 4th round pick for Trey Lance probably dropped out a round or 2, 5th, 6th round pick for Zach Wilson. Plus his contract is shorter than Trey Lance's was at the time of that trade for the Dallas Cowboys. So overall, I think you're looking at a late day 3 pick, maybe a pick swap to move up. Makes sense though.
Anthony, I hear the Giants could use a backup quarterback and maybe some competition for Daniel Jones. What do we think? Want to throw a day 3 pick the Jets' way for Zach?
Absolutely not. I know that the Giants are in the market for a quarterback, and we're going to talk about in a second. It seems like they'd like to trade up and land one of these top prospects. If they can't do that, though, I think that the free agent veteran market makes a lot more sense. We can't have another one of these failed experiments from New York just sitting on our roster. I mean, Daniel Jones is arguably one of these failed experiments that you said, like, the Jets have doubled down on their mistake with Zach Wilson. I mean, talk about double, triple, quadruple down on Daniel Jones. That's what the Giants have been doing. So I think it would just be too much of a circus to even entertain a Zach Wilson trade.
I thought maybe I'd get you to bite on it, but no, probably better off for the Giants to go the veteran quarterback route for the backup. As for same thing for the Jets. I think we said in episode 1, 2 of this show that we expect both teams to be in on the veteran quarterback market. So so long Zach Wilson truthers, not going to miss those daily fights, but I'm sure that'll continue to pop up as we go. But as you mentioned, the New York Giants, there's some trade talks with them as well. but a little bit different. Talks about the Giants potentially trading up for a quarterback. I'm sure you're excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thrilled about this. It's easier said than done, though. So I'm trying not to get my hopes up too high. I'm trying not to get high expectations or too much excitement flowing through me just because you're looking at those top three selections in this draft. You've got Chicago at number one. It sounds like they are still in the decision-making process. We're hearing a lot of they're definitely taking Caleb, but then at the same time, we're hearing a lot of teams are looking to trade up for that number one pick. So it's kind of like maybe they just need a little bit of convincing. Maybe the Giants could be that team to convince them. But then you're looking at number two, no shot the Giants can move up with the Commanders. They're never going to trade quarterback draft pick within the division. And then at number three, again, with the New England Patriots, a lot of conflicting rumors. We're hearing they're going to go the veteran quarterback route. Then we're hearing they're definitely sticking and picking at three. So as badly as I want the Giants to trade up and land Caleb Williams, Drake May, or Jaden Daniels, it's so much easier said than done moving from 6 to 3. Those wins down the final stretch of the season for the Giants, they were enjoyable. I was a big Tommy DeVito fan. I was living for it. I wanted to live in the Tommy DeVito era forever, but it came to an end, and overall it just hurt the Giants more than it helped them because now they're picking 6 and have a really tough time ahead of them if they want to try and land one of these top quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point too. Like, it's so easy to say, "Oh, why don't you just, for all fans, not just the Giants, but in this instance, well, oh, just trade up for a quarterback." Or you have some Jet fans who want to trade back from 10, but you need two sides to tango here. And specifically with these quarterbacks, the top three, I think you can make a very good case that all three are going to go in the top three to the teams, and they'll just stay there and pick a quarterback. Like, I don't know. There's some debate on what the Bears are going to do with Justin Fields. To me, I think it just reset the quarterback, contract and move Justin Fields somewhere, get a second round pick, and kind of build with your young guy. And for Washington, like, are you going to trade out and build around Sam Howell? I don't really love that. And then, like, what's the deal with New England? Are they going to give it back to Mac Jones for another year before making a decision? I think it's going to be tough, but not impossible. I think for the Giants side, their best spot is to move up to 3. I don't think 1 or 2 is really all that realistic.
I think 2 is completely off the table just because it's owned by the Commanders, and I don't think they'd even consider trading with the Giants for such a high-profile position and draft pick. But number 1 and number 3 look like they could be opportunities. Again, 3 only if the Patriots decide, like, hey, let's go into free agency and sign Kirk Cousins to a 1-year deal. That's going to be our quarterback this upcoming season. We'll figure out the rest later. That's a possibility that I could see them taking just because they need talent all over that roster, trading down, adding more draft picks. That would be the best way, I think, for the Patriots to start their rebuild. Starting it with the quarterback this offseason might not be ideal just because there are so many holes on this roster. They don't have a succession plan or a bridge quarterback in place. So I think that there are many opportunities for the Patriots to consider here with a trade down. And then with the Bears, honestly, that roster feels a little bit ready-made. It feels like it's pretty ready to compete. I think that their defense is solid, and it's not, top 10 or anything. At times it can be, though. And then their offensive line is up and coming. They've got some decent playmakers. They might be one of those teams that views themselves as being a quarterback away, and that might be why they just go ahead, stick and pick, and reset that quarterback window. But then again, that same argument could be made if Justin Fields just takes that step forward and we add in more draft capital and more players through this draft, then we're really ready to compete this year or next year. And if Justin Fields doesn't work out next year, the Bears will have a ton of draft capital and could just go ahead and find that rookie quarterback. Although, again, easier said than done. But honestly, if I had to bet on it, where are the Giants going to move up to get that quarterback? I want to say number 3, but I really think there's an outside chance that they could move up to number 1. But again, takes 2 to tango. And also, that's not going to be cheap. That's going to be 3 first-round picks from the Giants, probably 3 second-round picks as well. Like, you are giving up almost everything that you have to get up to number 1 overall and take Caleb Williams, who I don't think is the can't-miss prospect that most people seem to feel he is. I think there's a lot of risk involved with Caleb Williams. And then again, with the Giants, the only reason that I would make that trade if I were Joe Schoen is because if you don't make that trade, you're probably fired anyway. So who cares about all those first-round picks, right? That's the mindset that I think Joe Schoen is going to have. So that's why I do expect the Giants to be aggressive and try and move up for a quarterback in this draft. But again, you got to find a willing party.
Now, you talked about the cost of moving up to 1, but how do you think that would differentiate between the cost of moving up to 3. Because as you said, rule number 2 out, like you're not trading with Washington. That just doesn't make any sense. Obviously, the number 1 pick versus the number 3 pick is going to be a massive difference. But how much would you anticipate the Giants having to give up if they wanted to just jump up 3 spots?
So correct me if I'm wrong. What was acquired by the Colts when the Jets traded up for Sam Darnold in 2018?
I'm so glad you brought that up because I pulled it up because I was going to say this is familiar territory for the Jets. Jumping up from 6 to 3, they swapped picks, obviously. But that year in 2018, they had 2 second-round picks. So both seconds went to Indy. And then the following year, 2019, second-round pick as well. So it was 3 second-round picks to jump up the 3 spots.
Yeah, and I think something like that would make sense for the Giants to move up to number 3. They have 2 second-round picks in this year's draft, plus they have their second-round pick next year. So I think similar value. It's a similar quarterback prospect, I would say. I think most teams view Jaden Daniels in a similar light that they probably viewed Sam Darnold back then. So I would probably use that one as the model. I think that's a very likely trade package that the Giants could offer and hopefully get accepted. But again, that's only if the Patriots get their quarterback in free agency. If the Patriots don't get their quarterback in free agency, getting them to pass up on the opportunity to draft a Jaden Daniels or a Drake May, whoever's on the board at number 3, it's probably going to drive that price up a little bit. And maybe instead of 3 seconds, you're talking 2 seconds and a first. I think that's totally possible.
Can we start the Russell Wilson to New England Patriots chatter? Like,
I would love that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, please. He wants to win a couple more Super Bowls, right? Like, what better place to go than the New England Patriots with? I almost said Antonio Pierce, not Antonio Pierce. The other linebacker, Jerron Mayo. Come on down. Why not?
And then there's the other aspect of this where I'm glad you mentioned Jerron Mayo because there's another rumor and report coming out of this combine that Bill Belichick apparently left New England with their draft board and number 1 on it was Jaden Daniels. So you'd have to assume that hailing from the Belichick tree, being Belichick's successor and kind of protege, Jerron Mayo probably feels similarly about Jaden Daniels and maybe is looking at this number 3 pick as a can't miss opportunity to get the number 1 player on their board. So I think that there's a lot of factors at play. Now, you can interpret that one of 2 ways, though. Either you think Jerron Mayo is the protege of Bill Belichick and thinks like him and wants to take that player, or maybe they're going in a total tonal shift here and they want to go the opposite direction and not take who Belichick wanted. So it'll be interesting. But again, I just think that number 3 pick is really the X factor in this first round.
Yeah, it really is. Everything else kind of you feel like falls into place there, like Arizona going wide receiver F4. All things like that, beyond the top 3. And New England is going to be the biggest wild card. We'll see. But if I had to bet on it right now, I think they probably stay put and just take Jaden Daniels or Drake May. I know that there's, like, I saw something today. I think Orlovsky was talking on ESPN and he's like, oh, Jaden Daniels should be the number 1 pick. Like, we're going to get into crazy season where it's like, oh, this guy should be ahead of that guy. But when it's all said and done, probably going to be Jaden Daniels as the 3rd quarterback off the board.
Probably, but I did have on my solo channel a month or so ago, I posted a video, bold prediction why Jaden Daniels is going to be the number 1 pick, because I feel like his story and his rise to prominence here in this draft process is very reminiscent of the one that we saw from Baker Mayfield and also from Kyler Murray. Entered the college season not even viewed as maybe even a first-round pick, but wins the Heisman Trophy. And I think that Jaden Daniels is going to crush his combine interviews, and there's going to be hit pieces on other guys like Caleb Williams. I don't think that it's impossible for Jaden Daniels to end up becoming the number 1 overall pick. It's unlikely for sure, and it is crazy season, but there is a world that exists where he has a similar rise to Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield.
I like that bold prediction. Who knows? Maybe that's the case, but I just don't want to see Caleb or Drake May end up in New England. Not that Jaden Daniels might not be a good prospect as well, but I know the Jet fan fear is starting to creep in. If Jaden goes 1, then I'm going, oh no, one of those 2 are going to end up in New England. So anyway, how about we get into transition away from some of these trade talks and get into some other storylines. Back to the Jets here. Joe Douglas spoke to the media yesterday, and the biggest thing that he talked about, shocker, the offensive line. Now, everything that he was saying, I agree with. He was essentially saying, we got to put an emphasis on it. There's, they're going to need 3 new starters on the offensive line and that they have a plan and this and that. Well, that's very, very true, but it's the same thing I've been hearing for 6 years, Anthony. He's gotten here in 2019, and the first thing he said at his opening press conference is, we're going to build through the trenches. He's done a good job on the defensive line, but offensive line's still not very good, so a lot of work to be done here.
Yeah, and I can feel similarly as a Giants fan, watching us try and fail to rebuild that offensive line for what seems to be a decade now. I mean, you're talking all the way back 2014. I remember the debate was, should the Giants draft an offensive lineman? They ended up taking Odell Beckham Jr., which was a great selection, but Odell wasn't even maximized, and those final years of Eli's career weren't even maximized because of how bad the offensive line was. And here we are all these years later, the Jets, the Giants, still bad offensive line play. I mean, Giants have their franchise left tackle now with Andrew Thomas. I don't know when the last time the Jets could say the same to Brickashaw Ferguson, I guess. But when you're looking at the current status of both of these offensive lines, there's a lot of work to be done. However, thankfully, in this free agency class and this draft class, it does feel like there's a lot of talent available across the offensive line.
100%. And something else that he mentioned that's going to be such a key storyline and talking point is, see him on the graphic, Elijah Vera Tucker. They haven't decided where he's going to play yet on the offensive line. At least that's what he said yesterday. But I believe that. And the reason being is what I would do, what I think makes the most sense is because you have the 2 returning starters you have, AVT and Joe Tippmann. Both those guys have played multiple positions. AVT can play guard or tackle, and Joe Tippmann could play center or guard. So what I would do, I think it makes sense you go through free agency and then go through the draft, sign whoever you're going to sign, draft whoever you're going to draft, get your 5 guys in here who you want to be starters. And then once you get that 5 in here, at that point, decide who's going to play where, rather than pigeonholing yourself and saying, I absolutely want AVT at guard or absolutely want him at tackle, and we're going to go out and attack whatever in free agency in the draft. I'd rather kind of like let the chips fall as they may. And then when you get your 5, then decide, all right, who's going to be left tackle all the way over across the line.
I think that's probably the best strategy just because you don't know who's going to be available. You don't know who you're going to be able to sign. And it's kind of just one of those situations where you have to let the pieces fall into place rather than forcing it all together and, putting square pegs in the round holes in some way. I think that the Giants as well, just need to let things happen naturally, see who's available, see who's willing to sign, see how the market's looking, what are the price tags, who falls to you with the 6th pick, who falls to you with the 10th pick. That's just kind of the way I think this needs to go. You just wait and see approach rather than pigeonholing specific players into specific positions, because I think one of the things that the Jets have going for them on the offensive line is versatility. The 2 pieces that you mentioned, able to move around, that's always a major factor in your personnel decisions. So, and for what it's worth for the Giants, it's something that they don't have enough of. I don't think that they have guys who can move across the offensive line almost seamlessly and fill multiple positions for you. But again, that's why a guy like Michael Onwenu, who we've mentioned multiple times on the show already for both teams, makes so much sense in free agency. That versatility is just so valuable. So I think both of these teams need to kind of take a wait and see approach, see who's available for them, and then plug these players in.
Absolutely. And Onwenu is such a great name to bring up because, as you said, right guard or right tackle, and then you have AVT who could same discussion. So you get both guys in the building and go, all right, let's figure it out. Who's going to be more comfortable where? But I kind of just want, once they decide, I want them to just leave both players in those spots, because I don't love the moving around of these guys every year. Like 3 games of AVT at guard, then bounce him out to tackle and then lose him and stuff like that. It gets a little bit frustrating over the, year over year. Now, I'm not a believer that the only reason he got hurt was because he was moved out to tackle. I think, your Achilles could pop at tackle or your Achilles could pop at guard. And, there's, I don't know. I think some of that is a little bit overblown that he can't play at tackle because that just so happens to be where he got hurt the last couple of years. But it's going to be really interesting to see the route that they go. And today, before we hopped on, Brock Bowers was speaking with the media, and they asked him, like, who would it be cool to catch passes from? And he mentioned 2 names. One was Patrick Mahomes, and the other was Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers, Jets quarterback. I don't know if the Jets are going to be able to go that route at 10, as much fun as that would be. I think they're going to have to use that pick to round out this offensive line, and that's kind of where I wanted to take the discussion. I don't think, unless something crazy happens in free agency, where you're able to come away with filling pretty much every single hole that you have and not going into the draft with needing an offensive lineman, then maybe you could have that discussion. I just don't know how that's going to be possible for this team.
I think that taking an offensive tackle is an absolute lock for the Jets with the 10th overall pick. It's a strong tackle class, but particularly at the top, there's 3 guys that are bona fide first-round selections and that you feel comfortable taking in the top 10. That's kind of rare. It happens probably every 3 years now, seems to be the pattern. We get a new group of tackles that comes in, kind of similar to the Andrew Thomas class with Tristan Wirfs and Jedrick Wills. There was a few tackles at the top, and all of those guys, I mean, to varying extents, have gone on to have pretty successful careers, and that just feels similar to what we're seeing in this draft class. I think that there's a solid group of tackles at the top, and this is the time for the Jets to kind of capitalize on that. Brock Bowers is great, and I think that he's honestly an excellent prospect. He's one of the best players in this draft, but when you take into account positional versatility or value rather, and the kind of market and saturation of tackles versus tight ends versus receivers, you can't help but move Brock Bowers down your draft board just a little bit because of the position that he plays. And it's unfortunate to say it's a similar conversation that we have with Saquon Barkley and the running backs, but tight ends, other positions, you just can't justify valuing them at the same level that you value something like a franchise offensive tackle.
You mentioned that 2020 offensive tackle class, and that's not ideal because there was Tristan Wirfs was on the board, and the Jets decided to go instead the Mekhi Becton route, which is honestly a little bit of a fear of mine. I like all, as you mentioned, all the top 3 tackles: Fuaga, Fashanu, Alt. I don't think Alt is going to make it. I think you're probably choosing between Fashanu or Fuaga. That's going to be my guess for the Jets at pick 10. But we saw what seemed like an obvious situation where Tristan Wirfs was still available for the Jets at pick 11. Instead, they go Mekhi Becton. I'm worried, what if they go a similar route with a prospect, excuse me, in J.C. Latham, who comes in with a lot of size from Alabama. He's to me, that's a very boomer bust player, and I'm just nervous coming off of drafting the last time you took an offensive tackle, a very boomer bust player in Mekhi Becton. And granted, every prospect's different. I'm not saying that he's definitely going to have the same career path. That just makes me nervous based on the past history with this team.
Yeah, and I think that's, a justified fear to have. But what I will say, and maybe this is going to scare you a little bit more, I personally think Olu Fashanu is a little bit more boom and bust than people are giving him credit for. I think he gets moved around quite a bit in the running game. Excellent feet, really fast, really quick, off the line of scrimmage, is a great pass protector. Strength, I think, is a little bit of a problem. So he's a little bit of a different flavor than Mekhi Becton. So Mekhi Becton, whereas he was this big brawler, huge body, tosses people around like a rag doll with really poor technique, and those guys are fun and interesting if you have a really good coach to develop them. But then you have other guys like Olu Fashanu, really technically refined, has some great physical traits that are more quickness than size, but still has some work to do in the running game. So I don't think that any of these tackles are can't miss other than Joe Alt. I think that he is just Andrew Thomas 2.0. Like, he reminds me of Andrew Thomas. He's excellent, elite run defender or run blocker, good in pass pro, and super strong, has a ton of size. But with Mekhi Becton, I'll even just throw out and say it's well documented on Fireside Giants how cold I was on Becton in that draft class. I thought he was way too much of a project. I didn't even think he was a first-round worthy prospect. I thought that whatever team took him in the first round was going to get burned for it. That is ultimately what happened with the Jets. So I'll give myself a little bit of a pat on the back there, but also to say you hate to make the same mistake twice, and I think the Jets need to learn from that lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm right there with you. I would Fashanu or Fuaga would be my selection. I like Fuaga a lot as well. So if that's who they ended up coming away with, totally good with it. But moral of the story, Joe Douglas states the obvious. The Jets have to fix this offensive line. It is a very, very big need for this team. And then you get also the Giants. Some news. No tag for Saquon Barkley. Another thing that kind of felt like was going to be obvious here for New York.
Yeah, and then again, you're getting back into that conversation with positional value and how to prioritize this position versus that position. Running back position, our general manager, Joe Shane, just said it. It's a saturated market, and that's what we've been saying for years, and that's what we were saying as fans and as analysts were saying last offseason with the New York Giants, and what should they do with Saquon Barkley? Ultimately, they franchise tag him, and then they come to terms on a revised version of the franchise tag that had some incentives. He didn't reach a single one because they all required the Giants going to the playoffs, which they failed to do. So now if you're Saquon Barkley, you have to cash in now and you have to get that long-term deal with guaranteed money, or it's probably never going to happen for you. So I think that Barkley is kind of motivated to find the best price available, whether that be with the Giants or elsewhere. Of course, he talks about wanting to be a Giant for life, but realistically, this is a Giants team that I don't think can responsibly pay him the amount of money that he's seeking. Franchise tag makes no sense. They already tagged him once, so it's going to be an even more expensive tag this offseason. You cannot give this guy $12 million fully guaranteed, in my opinion. He misses time every year. He's missed significant time in the past with serious injuries. And in my opinion, and I know a lot of Giants fans don't agree with this, since those injuries, he hasn't quite been the same. I don't see the same burst. I don't see the same tackle breaking ability and elusiveness from Saquon Barkley that I saw in 2018 and 19. And let's be honest, that's 5 years ago at this point. He hasn't been the same player for the last 2 to 3 seasons. It's just not worth it to me to give him all that guaranteed money in a long-term deal when running backs really are just a dime a dozen. There are so many capable rushers who could go for 1,000 yards at any given season. And I'm talking about in the 4th to 7th rounds of the draft or on the lower end of the free agency market. It's so easy to get running back production, and it just doesn't make sense at this point for the New York Giants to invest such a heavy amount into Saquon Barkley.
I'm totally with you on that. Like, he just doesn't look like I pulled up his numbers here. Yards per attempt. 2 of the last 3 years was under 4 yards a carry. Even in this past year where he almost went for 1,000 yards, but he had 247 carries in 14 games. So he has a really big workload, and I just think the Giants would have to pivot a little bit for what they're trying to do offensively, which might not be a bad thing. Like, you can make the case that it's probably time that they do that. What I know, we've talked a little bit about, some potential pivot points on past episodes with free agency, but assuming that Saquon Barkley leaves and either goes to Houston or maybe Los Angeles with the Chargers, wherever, what would your pivot be at that point?
I like a few players in the draft. I like a few players in free agency. If I'm looking at the free agents, I really like DeAndre Swift. I think he's a guy that can give you 1,000 yards and can be a workhorse back for you, but also has a little bit of an element to kind of spell out of the backfield as a receiver and doesn't have a very high mileage total. Like Saquon, you just mentioned it, all those carries. I mean, he's been force fed the ball these past 2 seasons in Brian Dable's offense. Swift hasn't really had that treatment. He's never really been that guy to take 30 carries in a game, but maybe he could be. And maybe that's kind of where the Giants should go. A guy who hasn't been given that opportunity to be that workhorse, but has shown the ability to. And then when you're looking in the draft, I like a guy, Audric Estime out of Notre Dame. I think he's going to be there in the 3rd round if the Giants, haven't addressed the playmaker position, running back, receiver, tight end, whatever, playmaker position by that point. I think Audric Estime, 227 pounds, 5'11", looks like he was built to play running back in the NFL, had 18 touchdowns this past season for Notre Dame, ton of rushing yards. He can be your workhorse back, and he is entering the NFL with a little bit more mileage just because he was such a workhorse this past season for Notre Dame, but even still, he could be your bell cow, all 3 downs, maybe not the best receiving back, but sure, then you get like a Dion Lewis or, someone, James White kind of player to just be your receiving back, and you get that downfield runner between the tackles. That's something that I think the Giants offense, that punch you in the mouth mentality, has been kind of missing.
I love the DeAndre Swift idea, because this past year with Philly was the first time he had over 200 carries in a season. So he's 2 years younger than Saquon Barkley, and with, as you said, significantly less miles on him now. And then you could use, at your other assets, because he's not going to be nearly as costly as what a Saquon Barkley is going to be, but he's younger. And I don't know, if I had to guess of who's going to have the better 2024 season, I would think it would be DeAndre Swift than Saquon, depending on what situation he goes to, right? Like, I don't know. Once these running backs get to 27, man, it really seems to fall off pretty quick. And like you said, Saquon has had the injury history already early on in his career. I don't know why you'd want to sign up for that if you're the Giants, who are going through a little bit of a transition, right? Like, this is probably the last year Daniel Jones is your starting quarterback, you think. And like, I don't know. I don't think it makes sense for them. I think a team who maybe views themselves as a young and up and coming team that can maybe just use another offensive piece okay, sure. Like the teams I mentioned and the Chargers and Texans, I think would potentially be better fits there. But for the Giants, man, I love that Swift idea. And then the mid rounds is such a sweet spot for me. In rounds 2 to 5. You mentioned 4 to 7. You get production, but I'm even comfortable going in the second, third round because you see a lot of the talented guys. Like the Jets just did it with Brees Hall, second round pick, first running back off the board. Not nearly as costly as taking one in the first round. Granted, you don't get that, extra additional 50-year option, but there's value to be had.
There's a ton of value to be had. And another player that I think stands out to me is FSU's Trey Benson. He's also a guy, 6'1", 223 pounds. It looks like he was born to play running back in the NFL. And that's just the trend here these past several years is you want to talk second round of the draft with a Brees Hall, or do you want to talk seventh round of the draft, another extreme outlier with Isaiah Pacheco? But it's not really much of an outlier because it just feels like so many of those day 2, day 3 running backs end up panning out. And I know a lot of that is situation based. Not all these guys are ready-made products who are just falling in the draft for no reason. A lot of it is they're stepping into great offenses. But Brian Dable has a pretty good offensive game plan. And I think that Mike Kafka, where I do have my thoughts and feelings about his passing attack that he's been coordinating, I think his rushing attack has been rather solid for the most part. Now, I would like him to rely on the rushing attack a little bit more and, have more of a rotation in there at running back. I think having a committee would have helped this offense a lot last season because it almost feels to me like the Giants would be in situations where they're running the football really well, but they don't want to tire out Saquon Barkley. So they would just abandon the running game altogether because they didn't trust their backup running backs. I don't think that should be the case going forward. And the only way to have a committee is to not overpay any one running back. So with Saquon Barkley making $10 million on the salary cap last year, they couldn't really invest any more money and get a solid secondary back. They had to feed Saquon. So going forward, if they go ahead with a guy like a Swift, who's probably going to cost half of what Saquon Barkley is going to cost, well, then you can probably spend another couple million to get a solid backup rusher there, or maybe take a flyer on the middle rounds, and then go ahead and have a nice 1-2 punch rather than just putting all of your weight on Saquon Barkley's shoulders and asking him to carry your rushing game with a little bit of production mixed in from your quarterback. But now with Daniel Jones, if he's a starter next year coming off a torn ACL, I don't want to see him running the football, getting banged up, and once again dooming our season. So a little bit of a committee here is probably going to be the necessary pivot point from the Giants schematically. But overall, I think what they want to do is what the Chiefs and the Bills, Mike Kafka, Brian Dable have been so successful at in the past, throwing the football. They want to throw the ball more, but it's just really tough with this quarterback situation not figured out.
Absolutely. So that one's going to be an interesting one. But as we said, I think it would be, at this point, I would consider it surprising if Saquon Barkley is back with the New York Giants in 2024. As we're beginning to wrap up here, is there anything else jumping out at the combine this week, the remainder of the week, that you want to keep an eye on from the Giants' perspective?
Still keeping an eye out on the players that they're interviewing. They've officially interviewed with Jaden Daniels already. I read that Drake May is coming up. Caleb Williams is coming up. I think that's of note. Yes, the Giants are just doing due diligence. You have to interview all those top 10, ranked prospects if you're picking in the top 10. But I do think that the timing of it, considering we're hearing that they're interested in trading up and they have been for quite some time, and now that they're interviewing these guys, I think that they're trying to figure out who is and who isn't worth trading up for, who could be a fit in their culture. So I think that's really important to note from the Jets' perspective as well. Who do they meet with? The meetings are the most important part of the NFL scouting combine to me. It's going to be fun to watch running backs and receivers run 40-yard dashes, and it's going to make for some cool social media highlights. But realistically, what those teams are there in Indianapolis for is the interview process, meeting those prospects and deciding who is a good fit off the field for our organization.
Great points with the interviews. Now, something similar on the Jet side of things. So it was announced earlier in the week or late last week that Robert Saleh wasn't going to be attending the combine, and some fans just went absolutely buck wild with that. But Joe Douglas said yesterday at his conference that he's going to be flying out on Saturday and Sunday because they have some interviews lined up that he wants him to be a part of. So it's kind of the same thing. I'm curious to see who they're going to be meeting with this weekend and who is Robert Saleh coming to talk to, because that'll give you really a good idea what direction that they're going in the draft and just what they want to do in the future. So to me, those are the biggest things, as you mentioned, those interviews.
Yeah, and if I had to speculate, I think they're probably planning on Saturday night to meet with offensive tackles. I think that'll make the most sense. You got to get Salah in the building. He's going to be your head coach. He's going to be, the guy leading the charge here. So I think offensive tackle is going to be the interview process there. And I know that there was one point of conversation, a little bit off topic, but I saw that the Washington Commanders were having their new owner, sit in on those interviews, which is atypical. There were some fans that were like, well, they're picking a quarterback. I would hope he's sitting in on that. Most owners don't. And I find that a little bit interesting. And I think that opens up a conversation about, should owners sit in for such important draft picks? Like, should John Mara be in there for the Giants while they're interviewing these quarterbacks this offseason? I think that there's an aspect of it that tells other teams, like, hey, you're showing your plans to us. Like, we know now that the Washington Commanders are taking a quarterback. I think that's one way to interpret it. But I just thought that was an interesting takeaway that a lot of fans had from the first couple of days of this scouting combine, just the level of involvement or lack thereof that certain owners or coaches may have in the whole process.
Speaking from a fan of a team that their owner is way too involved, I don't think it's a good thing. Like, there was a report that Woody Johnson was in on the exit interviews, which I don't love that. My opinion on what makes a great owner, got to have a willingness to spend, right? So I think both, the Jets and the Giants have that. But I think they also have to hire the right football people and then let those football people do their job. Like, micromanaging and getting in on it and putting your say on it, I think only complicates things. So I don't particularly love that for Washington.
Yeah, I'm mostly in agreement with you, but the conversation, I think, is a little bit different from a Giants fan's perspective, because there's one half of the fan base that feels like John Mara is super involved and is really calling the shots. And then I'm in the other half where I feel like he's actually been very hands off and has let the guys do their job. Because I remember back when they traded Odell Beckham Jr., and they were talking to John Mara in an interview shortly thereafter. And he was like, yeah, my grandson didn't talk to me for 2 months. And he cried on the phone when he did talk to me because he was so mad at me, but I had to let the GM do his job. And then I think when you're looking at their decisions to not give Saquon Barkley a long-term deal, the things that you would expect John Mara to do, they haven't necessarily done, is kind of the point that I'm making. So I think John Mara gets a lot of unnecessary flack just because of how bad the Giants have been. But overall, the points that you mentioned, letting the football guys do their job and being willing to invest, I think John Mara does a pretty solid job with that. He's not perfect. No owner or GM is, but realistically, the issue lies within the Giants front office. And maybe that's where you can say Mara shouldn't have any of his brothers or children in the front office working for him. That's probably the deeper issue here with John Mara and the way he runs his team. But I think that him as an owner, I don't think he's super involved in the playmaker personnel decision making, but his family members certainly are.
Oh boy. So that is going to do it for us on this episode of Big Apple Blitz. Please, before you go, make sure to subscribe, like the video, share with a friend. Make sure to subscribe to Anthony's channel and Fireside Giants for more NFL draft and Giants content. For me, make sure to go over to Matt O'Leary NY and Talking Jets for all my other Jets stuff and content and shows that we're doing. It's been a lot of fun so far, and excited to keep this rocking and rolling, Anthony. It's been a good couple weeks.
Absolutely. It's been a great time, and I'm excited to keep going.
That's going to do it. I'm Matt. He's Anthony. We'll catch you next time.